Sir, kindly put his.
Respected Secretary DOPT, Shri Deepak Khandekarji, Secretary DARPG, Shri Sanjay Singh ji, Director General IAPA, Dr. S. N. Tripathi ji, members CVC, Shri Praveen Pardeshi ji. I haven't met you, but this is the first time I have the opportunity of listening to you. Distinguished participants, Professor Ashok, good to see you again. And I'll be very brief. I have a small presentation on the capacity building programs of NCGG. But before I go into that, let me just highlight, it's a great privilege to speak at the Indian Institute of Public Administration. Every time I walk in here, I'm reminded of the report of Appleby and the concepts on which this great institution was founded. And the DARPG's library did have a copy of Appleby's report. It's a brief report on how the organization and method systems in government work. And Appleby's report, if you read even today, says that there are 42 levels in the Central Secretariat in which a FR was processed. And that was in 1953. So today, when Secretary DARPG is trying to bring in improvements in systemic funding, reducing the channels of submission to 4, it's a major reform that is being undertaken. And of course, to speak in this particular auditorium named after T.N. Chaturvedi. T.N. Chaturvedi ji was from our cadre, Rajasthan cadre, 1950 batch. I remember I had very close association working with T.N. Chaturvedi ji, even until his last days when he was admitted at the All India Institute of Medical Sciences and was looking after his treatment. One of India's legendary civil servants. And it's only apt that the Capacity Building Commission's first outreach workshop is being conducted in this particular auditorium. In fact, one of the really seminal publications of Chaturvedi has been given to us. Thank you for this book. The emphasis that the Capacity Building Commission has laid down is that the massive mandate in enhancing state capacity remains the challenge for India at 75. And that is what has come out from the speeches of each of the members, the chairperson, that it's enhancing state capacity, particularly to meet the e-governance agenda, to meet the enhanced expectations. The second is, of course, the Honorable Minister did point out to the foundational values, that the moral overtones in the Constitution that have been laid down, which are integrity, ethics, accountability, and these are foundational values that are laid down, which simply have to be followed. And most of the institutions that are present here would be training individual officials in understanding rule of law, in promoting a seriousness of purpose, in creating a disciplined cadre of civil servants. Also simple aspects like conducting night halts, conducting inspections, do the simple things right, and then governance will move on. That is what is the broad structure that the capacity building institutions in there. But as an officer who has moved multiple times between the state administration to central administration to international governance, given back to the state, I find that policy making has become an extremely complex exercise. It's not an easy exercise. And every job has a steep learning curve. I do recall my discussion with Dr. Dur Subbarao after he had served as finance secretary, went on to become governor RBI, and I asked him, how does he find the job? He said, Srinivas, it's a very steep learning curve. Shifting from fiscal policy management to monetary policy management is not an easy change. Every job has a steep learning curve. And when an officer works in the state government, you work on a state list. When you come to the central government, the central secretariat working on central lists, it presents an entirely different challenge in which to work. And we run a small institution, the National Center for Good Governance, and we work across the spectrum from district governance to state governance to central government capacity building programs, and also for international civil servants. Today, the NCGG represents the largest capacity building institution for international civil servants, having trained about 2,500 international civil servants last year. So I'll quickly run through this slideshow and show how we are approaching governance and on capacity building programs. Now, the NCGG is currently an autonomous institution. It's an autonomous institution under the Department of Administrative Reforms. It was founded at the National Institute of Administrative Research when we were probationers. Dr. B.N. Yugandhar was the man who conceptualized it as the National Institute for Administrative Research. It went on to take up a number of small-time projects, then upgraded as a Center for Good Governance at national level in 2014. The Secretary DRPG chairs our management committee. Next, please. And the mandate is to undertake capacity building programs at national, international level, also to conduct a huge number of studies and webinars, workshops. Next, please. The way we have positioned ourselves is we have a major collaboration with the Ministry of External Affairs, and international civil servants have been an area of focus. Next, please. So India actually trains a huge number of Bangladesh civil servants. In fact, 1,800 Bangladesh civil servants visit the NCGG. 1,500 have already been trained, and they come for physical programs. These are 2-week programs in which capacity building is the major focus. Next, please. We also have a major program with Maldives. Almost 1,000 civil servants from Maldives come in. And let me tell you, one big area where the focus of international civil servants has been is ethics. And that, in fact, I recall my discussion with the Vice President of Maldives, and what he said was, ethics is one area that he wants capacity building should be enhanced. And ethical values, he said, everybody in my country is related to the next person. How do you build ethical values to ensure a neutral administration? How do you ensure rule of law where justice seems to be done and justice is done properly? So this was a core area on which there's tremendous focus. Of course, there is also focus on e-governance models, where a particular emphasis on the new India models like the direct benefits transfers, passport seva kendras, one nation, one ration card, a huge number of new e-governance models which have aimed at improving service delivery. Next, please. We also have a huge collaboration with Africa, and a number of African countries, as also South Asian countries, have been visiting. We have a significant collaboration with states. And next, please. The big one we have is with Jammu Kashmir, and 2,000 state government officials would be undergoing capacity building programs at the NCGG. And in our discussions with the Chief Secretary, one big area that has come out is general financial rules. For a state which has become a union territory where central rules apply, application of the general financial rules has become a big challenge. How do you make procurements with them when your procurement officers are not listed? So this is an area that we've been looking at as to how do you enhance capacity in implementing central laws in a newly created union territory. We also have a number of programs with states like Orissa, with Madhya Pradesh, Rajasthan, Gujarat. We did do the public-private partnership program. And I do recall there were a number of issues as to how transaction advisors would be appointed and how valuation of assets, risk transfer, risk assessment would be undertaken. Next, please. We do host a number of workshops, and the pandemic brought in a huge change in our paradigm and brought a paradigm shift in the way we approached good governance. Next, please. And we hosted workshops for groups of countries, and we found the response to India's policy models was very significant, particularly the governance practices that were adopted in the pandemic. People were keen to know about e-office. People were very keen to know how virtual web rooms with virtual private networks could be provided. How did the Central Secretariat function during the period of such intensive lockdowns? And the first workshop, we had about 19 nations participating, 250 civil servants. Then we did one with Africa, in which 26 African nations came in. And then we did a workshop for Maldives, in which the foreign minister of Maldives was also a participant. And about 1,350 Maldivian civil servants came in. Next, please. Next, please. Yes, we do a number of workshops for district collectors. I think that is the cutting edge level where officers have stood at the front lines of duty, and particularly in the period of the pandemic. And the workshops have focused on aspirational districts where the highest developmental challenges lie. We've tried to reach out to universities and senior thinkers on public administration. Public administration itself has evolved into a major science, particularly evidence-based policymaking. How do you use evidence-based policymaking? As Mr. Pardeshi pointed out, thousands and thousands of grassroots workers, clerks, stenos, what is their experience in taking it forward, and evidence-based policy making into a platform wherein which proper research work could be undertaken. We have a membership of the American Society of Public Administration. We've been holding some workshops with them. Secretary DARPG has recently chaired a workshop on how contemporary histories of civil services across nations, how they have grown. Next, please. Next, please. We've been hosting a number of webinars. In fact, every Friday a webinar is held. And the webinars have tried to focus on institutions, because India's governance models, be it at the state level or at the central level, are built on institutions. The district collector is one of the central institutions of governance, the other being the institution of chief secretary, then the central secretariat. How do you enhance and bring about peer learning in these institutions is what we've tried to bring in. Digital learning and digital success stories, administrative innovations at district level. We've also tried to rope in Indian institutes of management, Indian institutes of technology, particularly to build in areas wherein which technology transfer to citizens can be made possible. Next, please. In fact, the MEA rated us as the Institute of Focus for last year, and we've been given a number of webinars for propagating India's governance model across South Asia and also across Africa. So we have a series of international workshops that have been planned. The first one has been recently held on 6th August. Next, please. So we also do a huge number of studies and publications. In fact, I'm glad that the IAP has brought out this huge compendium which provides a wealth of data on how Mission Karma Yogi is being implemented. We did something for about 40 countries with regard to the governance practices in the pandemic, and that book is under publication. Next, please. So these are some of the glimpses, the minister addressing the Maldivian civil servants about the permanent secretaries from Maldives who attended. Next, please. This is our MOU which was signed with Bangladesh. Next, please. This is the picture of the MOU with the Vice President of Maldives after the visit of the Prime Minister. Next, please. This is with our first workshop with 19 Asian countries. Next, please. And we had the Minister of State for External Affairs visiting us for the workshop with 26 African countries. Next, please. The workshop with aspirational districts. This is a very, the next slide, please. This is a very interesting subject. Every country has a civil service. How are civil services progressing? What are the practices that are being adopted? For example, how does the United States civil service compare with the Indian civil service or with the Nigerian civil service? We tried to put together, and one thing that came out in the Nigerian model was that they had become, from a democracy, they went into a military dictatorship. And from a military dictatorship to come back to a democracy, changes that the civil service had to undergo, the total orientational change that was required for a civil servant to be accountable in a democracy. That was a picture that was presented by Dr. Chukwuka Onyekwena in this. Next, please. This is our international webinar that we had pointed out, propagating India's best governance practices abroad. Next, please. We do have workshops with regard to presenting state-level best practices like smart governance models of Karnataka, Uttar Pradesh, Telangana, which have featured very high on the National E-Services Delivery Index at a national level. Next, please. We've tried to bring in thinkers and particularly strengthening institutions in achieving sustainable development, bring in lead vice chancellors or eminent scholars in public administration. We had the Mary Parker Follett awardee, Professor Rumki was there, Paul Humphrey Oppleby's awardee, Professor Ramesh Arora. We brought in a group of thinkers on how institutions can be strengthened. Next, please. Jammu Kashmir represents a big area of change and a lot is happening there. We've been visiting J&K a number of times. We did have a presentation on the administrative innovations of J&K. Next, please. Then administrative innovations at district level is a big area of focus. So all the PM award winners were invited to make presentations. Next, please. LBSNA represents the foremost institution and in terms of building ethical, knowledge-based civil servants. So we did have the director LBSNA. Next, please. the institution of chiefs, this is our Good Governance Day lecture. We had Ram Sevak Sharma ji and Swadhin Kshatriya making a presentation on Aadhaar. Next. Chief Secretary is a critical institution in the state government, and we've tried to invite some of the outstanding chief secretaries to present how they could bring in the civil servant political relationships to the fore, and how negotiations, interpersonal skills, building large teams could be done. Next, please. Then we had district collector's role here. In fact, the history of the district collector way back from 1834 onwards was documented and by Mr. C.K. Matthew, a former chief secretary of Rajasthan. So these are some of the trust areas that we've been working on. I thought I'll share this on this forum, particularly in this hall before such an eminent gathering. Thank you very much, sir, for giving me this opportunity.